So now we've covered the basic balancing of the mix, so understanding the new structure of the top-down idea and getting used to the idea of looking at the numbers and seeing how our volumes are set for our different sections. So first of all, obviously looking at the groups, but then making sure that our overall mix bus is in a specific area. And we were talking about that -6 to -3. We're about -6.5 here, -6.2 on our reference track, so we've got like an even spread between what we are listening to in a reference and our overall levels of the tracks. But now one of the best stages to go to when we're looking at this efficient style of mixing is to go straight after we've gone to the basic balance of all of our groups, is to then look at the equalization of our groups. Because if we think about it technically, equalization is a volume change. So all equalization is really technically is a volume change, just like a standard volume, but all you're doing it is on a specific band of frequency or around a specific frequency. So this could be additive or subtractive. Now, normally in any kind of mixing context, it's a good idea or good practice to take something away before you add something in. Because we already have a really nice amount of headroom within our groups here at this stage, we can obviously start to subtract things, but we're not afraid of adding in things because we do have the headroom to play with. So if I just open up the EQ, we're going to talk about the EQ mindset within this video. So I'm going to be using this EQ here. This is the Pro Q3 by FabFilter. The reason I'm using this EQ is basically because it gives you so many different options for visualization to help you out when you are trying to pinpoint specific frequencies, any problems, any troubleshooting, but it is also a very nice clean EQ. For this stage, we're going to want to do more clean EQ than we are toneful or characteristic EQ, because this we're trying to again make the best sound for those groups as possible. Now remember, we're doing this on a group level, so we could start to EQ the mix on the mix bus, but we're going to start here on the group level, not the individual level, because it's not very efficient in that way, because we may spend a lot of time working on things in solo. This way we can work on things in solo but within their groups. So for instance, here I've got the drum group. If I just solo the drum group and just play just the drums, so we can have a look at the frequencies that are being taken up within our frequency range within this EQ. We can see what we're listening to. Another great feature of this EQ is that I can click this here and it will open up full screen. So let's have a listen to see what we get from this. So if we look at this now, you can see on this EQ, if I just go below the 0 point line, it gives me a hold visual, so I can see the frequency curve of those drums over time. And if we're looking at this, we can see that the processing of these drums at a production stage was done very well. We can see here that there's no very, very low range below a certain frequency down here, around about the 30 hertz. And we can also see that it's been cut off around 20 hertz here. This shows that we've got a good amount of bass, a good amount of top and low kick. We've got a nice dip in the mid-range here, which is sort of the places where we could think about putting our low-mid synths, low parts of vocals and so on. Other instruments, places for those to sit. And we've got a nice rise here for that higher percussion, so the hi-hats, cymbals, shakers, and percussive elements. So as a tone, as a characteristic for these drums, this is a really nice curve to look at. So when Matt was producing this track, as a producer, he also had the mixing mindset in mind, so understanding where things are going to sit within the mix. Again, another reason for this EQ is just the fact that you get to see this line. So if I just come above the line again, it erases. But let's see what we can get by adding in and subtracting certain things. Now remember, we listened to this in solo, but we're listening to this as a whole of all of the drums. So any movements that I do make will end up doing that movement or adding that or subtracting that frequency range to every sound that's in the drums. So let's have a listen and see what we can get from it. So you can see here where the clap section is, around this 1K area, it could be poking through a little bit more just in terms of balance with the rest of those drums. So what we can do here is just gradually bring this up on a fairly wide curve. So let's have a listen and EQ while we're listening. See, now what we've got from that, it's quite exaggerated for the purposes of the video, but what you get from that is just around that clappy area in the lower parts of the percussions, you can hear more of the environment that goes around it. And what I did was I lifted on a fairly tight cue just to try and pitch that sound. So what we did was we moved around until it was sort of in key or in pitch with the rest of that drum sound. Now this is a great place to start EQing, not in solo. So what we're going to do now is come out of here and bring in the bass with this as well, so we can hear bass. At the moment, all I was doing was kind of tuning that snare drum or that clap to the rest of the drums. If we bring the bass in now, we'll be able to properly tune that snare drum to the rest of the track. So let's have a play with this now. See the added environment we get around that snare, or that clap, sorry, with that bass line. So now let's bring in the vocal parts and those instruments, just so we can make sure that we're in the right area just for those drums.
Love can take it down.
So what we're getting from that now is it's in the right area, and we've pulled that down just enough so it's not really overtaking and changing the sound of the mix of those drums. It's just exaggerating what is kind of there. So when it's in, it sounds nice, but when it's out, it sounds like there's something lacking now from the drums. Now this is the sort of the mindset around EQ when mixing. The difference between EQing when mixing and EQing when producing is when you EQ in production, you're EQing the sound. So you're EQing the specific noise. So say we're doing this to a kick drum. What you would do in production is you would EQ the kick drum to make a sound for that kick drum. You would make a sound for the drum itself to get the actual noise of the kick drum. The difference between that EQ and then mixing EQ is when you're EQing in the mix, what you're trying to do is EQ that sound or EQ that kick drum to work with everything else. That is the main difference. Production EQ is more about the individual sound, making the sound a certain way. EQ in mixing is making sure that that sound works with everything else. So it takes up an area of frequency that doesn't get in the way of something else, but also exaggerates the goodness in what is already there. So now we've done this for the drums, we can move on to the bass. So we can listen to the bass on its own here. And let's open another EQ here so see what we can. As you can see here, the main points are the C's part of the C's in here, but what you're getting from this is, and what you can see from the visual on this is, again, when Matt was producing this, he had the mix in mind. It's only taking up a specific space. This is a bass line. This bass line here, we're looking at around about 70 to 60 hertz, 65 to 70 hertz for this sub area or this bassier frequency, which is really, really good for this sort of track. And you can see that it slowly, gradually moved off, and there was nothing above the mid-range within this bass line. This, for EQ terms, means that we don't really have to add much. We don't really have to take much away, and we don't really have to add much in. But now we've got a good sound with our bass drum and our bass sound, we can start to work with those together. So now let's look at the drums as a whole, not just the kick drum on its own, which is a common thing. Most people just EQ the kick drum to the bass. We need to listen to the bass line with the rest of the track, because even though the bass line is in a specific bass area, it's still in the area of where the snare is, the low parts of those claps, low parts of the percussions. There's still quite a lot of information down there that could clash with this bass. So let's have a listen. So let me just explain what was going on there. So what we've done is that second note, so that the original note, so the first note here, so that original first 2-stab note sounded really nice, but then the 3-stab note just after, that one there, the 3-stab note, that didn't come through as thick as the other one did. So what I've done here is just added in around about 2 decibels, so not too much, around about 2 decibels, just around about that note. What I also found was lower down, higher up, in the lower midsection, around 224 hertz. Just getting rid of that made these notes down here sound more prominent. It didn't take away much from the higher notes, it just made them sound more prominent lower down. So you've instantly got that thicker, warmer sound to the bass. And it's literally as simple as that. So what we're going to do is take these two here. We're going to listen to just the bass and the drums. And then out of these tracks, I'm going to bypass the plugins so you can't hear what they're doing, and then you can hear what they're doing. So the difference you get there is a subtle difference, but it's just about enough to be able to make it sound thicker and warmer. Let's bring everything in together and let's see what we can get just with those two there by getting rid of that EQ and then putting that EQ back in.
Love can take it down. You can take me down. I'll take you. Love can take it down. You can take me down. I'll take you.
See how much thicker and warmer that low end is there. Now when we're going back through to this, we can kind of hear that it could be too much for some people. It could be a little bit too far ahead. So let's bring this down a little bit here to more of a conservative number. So let's go to 1.8 dB. So we've gone down about half a decibel in terms of that. So it's still going to sound warmer. It's just not going to be as dominant or as warm. Because remember, we've got later stages after this. We've got our drums and bass mix here, and we've also got our overall mix bus. So we don't want to overdo it too much. Now this is sort of the EQ mindset works exactly the same with all groups. So we would do the same thing for the vocals, we would do the same things for the instruments, and it would be dependent on what the source material is that is flowing through those groups. So the EQs, for instance, for the vocals,
Love can take it down. Love can take it down.
it sounds like a really, really nice vocal, and it's, extremely well processed. But what you can hear inside the vocal stem, there is already reverbs, there is already effects. Let's have a listen again.
Love can take it down.
There's already that within the stem itself, within the production of the track. So let's have a look and see what we've got in terms of our equalization analysis.
Love can take it down.
And you can see here again,
Love can take it down.
you can see here this is really well processed at the production stage. There is no low mid frequency whatsoever. It's cut off here literally at about what looks like 200 hertz. So this is a bit classic for electronic dance music. Any vocal is cut very high up, so it may sound quite thin on its own, but then when the other things in the track are there, the other groups, the other elements, it sits perfectly within the mix. And that's how you can get a track or a vocal, to sit in a mix and not sound like it's on the mix, if that makes sense. So let's have a look at this and see if we can get anything out of this.
Love can take it down. Love can take it down. Love can take it down. Love can take it down.
A little bit there.
Love can take it down.
Let's maybe go for a little bit of air on this. So we'll put in a new band here, and we'll change this to a shelf.
Love can take it down. Love can take it down.
It's kind of nice there. We'll bring this down to about 18k. So what we're doing is we're lifting a shelf, but then we're cutting quite high up.
Love can take it down.
So what we're doing is just airing that vocal out a little bit. And remember, this is on the group, so this is every vocal that's flowing through this is getting this treatment.
Love can take you down.
So right, let's go through and just listen to the drums, bass and vocals together, and we'll do that bypassing of the EQs. So let's take away all of the EQs so far, and then we'll bring those EQs in at the end of a bar.
Love can take you down. You can take me down. I'll take it. Love can take you down. You can take me down. I'll take it. Love can take you down.
So if you can hear the difference in that, you're just getting a little bit more separation between them. Each of those things sound a little bit more exciting. And it sounds like you've done a lot more subtly. You've done a lot more subtle things than just adding an EQ to these groups. This is a great way, again, looking at efficiency, this is a great way to get the overall sound of your mix to sound consistent, clear and open, rather than just going straight into kick in solo. So for instance, doing something like this,
Love can take you down.
or just like listening to the kick on its own. Is that okay? We could spend about 10 or 15 minutes EQing this kick in solo, but then we don't know what it sounds like with the rest of it. And then once we've got it sounding good with the rest of the drums, that may have taken maybe half an hour if we're lucky, we then listen to it with the rest of it, and we're still going to have to come back and do some form of change or processing to make it fit with all the other element groups. So we might as well start at the top level, so the top down idea. So that's kind of the EQ mindset. The next video we're going to look at is the understanding of the next process. So what is the next thing that we should be thinking about putting in within our groups in this top down idea?